Hello, and thank you for clicking on my video. Now, if you've seen any of the other videos in this series, you'll know that my name is Alex, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I live here in Tasmania in Australia, where today, as you can see, we're having some very heavy rain, as well as some storms over the mountain. You can probably hear some of the thunder. This story is another one in my series from Dinosaur Dell, the village entirely inhabited by dinosaurs and other prehistoric reptiles. This is story number 4, the story of Nick Noasaurus's Ark. And appropriately, there's a lot of rain, thunder, and lightning in this story. And I'll let you into a little secret. The character of Nick the dinosaur is based on my friend Nick. I hope you enjoy the story. I think I'd better get undercover. Under the volcano. And not too far from the sulphur springs and the pits of tar. In the middle of a forest of tall tree ferns, you'll find some houses where the footpath turns. This is where I live. You can tell from the roars, my neighbours are all dinosaurs. I'm Alex the Alxosaurus. Hello. Now, once upon 70 million years ago... Wait, which of the stories shall I tell about the dinosaurs living in Dinosaur Dell? The story of Nick Noasaurus's Ark. The dinosaur whose story I'll tell you in this book lives on a hill outside the dell, which overlooks a brook. The brook flows through a canyon where lots of animals roam, and the house on the hill by the canyon with the brook is Nick Noasaurus's home. The canyon is Nick's favourite spot, and we go walking there a lot. We love to paddle in the brook, and, because he's a very good cook, we pick berries of every colour and size, which he makes into crumbles and bakes into pies. Nick loves rock climbing on the canyon wall. I don't go, I'm scared I'll fall. And as he climbs, he often greets the valley animals he meets. There are tortoises, geckos, lizards and frogs, snails and millipedes under the logs, snakes and iguanas of each species and size, ants, earwigs and beetles, and bright butterflies. And one of those butterflies, a beautiful blue and purple butterfly, had just landed on Nick's snout as he was out climbing that sunny summer afternoon. "Hello, butterfly," he said cheerfully. "Where are you off to this afternoon?" Of course, the butterfly didn't answer. Who ever heard of a talking butterfly? She just spread her wings and floated up into the air. Nick went on climbing, and he hadn't gone very far when a second butterfly flew past him as he climbed the canyon wall. It was joined by a third, and the two butterflies flitted around his head before flying further up the rocky wall of the canyon. "Maybe they're a family, out for an afternoon flight," said Nick as they disappeared. He had nearly reached the top of the canyon wall when suddenly more butterflies appeared. A huge cloud of butterflies of all colours and kinds. They didn't stop, but flew past him, up and over the canyon wall. "Well," said Nick to himself, "I never saw anything like that before. That must be just about every butterfly in the canyon. I wonder where they're going." Well, there was no trace of the butterflies when he reached the top of the canyon, so he never found out quite where they were going. But as he looked across the top of the canyon into the far distance, he had an idea why they might have left. For in the far distance, clouds of billowing smoke and ash blotted out the sun and the blue summer sky. That was where the volcanoes were. No wonder the butterflies had left the canyon, thought Nick. At that moment, Professor Pteranodon flew overhead. She saw Nick and landed beside him. "You're fascinating, isn't it?" she said breathlessly. "This is what we call a magmatic eruption. The molten hot lava inside the volcano bubbles up to the surface and becomes red-hot lava. I never had the chance to study one close up before." "But what about the animals in the canyon?" asked Nick anxiously. "Oh, I wouldn't worry about them. The lava is flowing away from the canyon, you see," replied Professor Pteranodon, gesturing with her wing. "Now I must fly, and don't you worry. If I know anything about volcanoes, the eruption will have stopped by tomorrow." And off she flew. "Be careful," called Nick, as she disappeared from sight into the dark clouds of smoke. Then he peered anxiously down into the canyon. "I hope she's right," he said. The next day, the volcano had stopped erupting. The orange lava had cooled and turned black and hard, but the smoke still hung in the air. Nick clambered down into the canyon. The butterflies still hadn't returned, nor did he see any of the other animals, not a tortoise or a gecko, not a beetle or an ant. It made him sad and a little worried too. He picked some blackberries that were growing by the side of the brook and put them in his knapsack for later. Then he began climbing back up the rocky canyon wall. Shortly after he had started his climb, a fat raindrop hit him squarely on the snout. It was followed by another, and another, and another, and another, until the rain became a proper downpour. By the time he reached the top of the canyon, he was soaked through. He turned to look across the canyon and gasped. Huge, ugly, grey storm clouds hung down from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, there was the deep rumble of thunder, and the rain began to hammer down even harder than before. Suddenly, Nick had a horrible thought. What if the brook at the bottom of the canyon flooded? The fish would be all right, and the butterflies had already flown away. But what about the animals that couldn't swim or fly to safety? They were small and helpless. He had to think of something. In a flash, he was running back to his house on the hill, and one more flash later, he had grabbed his tools. Now, around Nick's house there was a wood, where several large trees grew, sequoias, star pines, and palm trees, and in amongst them was the old trunk of a bunya pine, which had fallen many, many years ago. As fast as he could, Nick took his tools to the fallen trunk, and barely 1 hour later he had made a perfect boat. There was just one thing it needed: a sail. He ran back into his house, grabbed the sheet from his bed, and tied it to a branch. The hollowed-out trunk was very heavy, but Nick just managed to heave and haul the sailboat he had made into the brook that ran past the house on the hill. And all the while, the rain beat down. As the thunder rolled and the sky grew dark, the brook carried Nick's boat downstream, slowly at first, and then faster and faster. It reached the edge of the canyon, and down, down, down it went over the waterfall. Nick just managed to hold on. On the canyon floor, the water was beginning to rise. But where were all the animals? Nick looked around, trying to see through the driving rain. There! Just to his starboard side, which is what you must remember to call the right-hand side of your boat when you are sailing it, there was a large cactus. Half of it was already underwater. Clinging to the top of it was a colony of ants, all 200 of them. Their nest had been washed away by the rain. Nick rowed himself over. "Crawl aboard, ants!" he called, and the ants walked along the spines of the cactus and into the boat. And in single file, too, because ants are always orderly, even in the middle of a crisis. But there was no time to waste. The last ant had only just reached the boat when Nick heard a frantic chirping from nearby. The brook had burst its banks now and flooded the reed beds that usually lined the water. Holding on miserably to the reeds were a cloud of grasshoppers. The rain made it impossible for them to fly. Just in time, Nick arrived. They fluttered gratefully into the boat. The water swirled the boat through the reeds. The brook was more of a river now, and the passengers in the boat found themselves bumping against the blackberry bushes where Nick had picked the berries only a few hours before. It was a stroke of luck for the little family of earwigs that had curled themselves up in the flowers there, hoping to weather the storm. Very carefully, Nick plucked the flowers and placed them, and their cargo of earwigs, gently in the bottom of the boat. The water had now covered the floor of the canyon, and the boat was lifted higher and higher. A log floated past, to which several dozen millipedes clung miserably. Nick stretched out his claws, and the seasick millipedes scuttled to safety, just as the log was overturned by a wave. Just to the port side, which is what you must remember to call the left-hand side of your boat when you are sailing it, a boulder loomed into view. Nick realised with a shock that the boulder was usually the top of a hoodoo, a sort of tower of rock that reached up from the canyon floor. The water must be very deep by now. Hunkered down all over the rock were 60 snails, all trying to weather the storm in their shells. Nick picked them all up, one by one, just as the rising water swallowed the boulder up. And there, bobbing in the water, were a troop of beetles who hadn't been fast enough to escape the water. Nick caught them up and dropped them into the boat, where they shook the water from their shiny black backs. The boat was now quite crowded, and it was about to get even more crowded. Off the stern, which is what you must remember to call the back of your boat when you are sailing it, was an army of frogs. Now frogs love to swim, but with a storm lashing the water it was getting very uncomfortable for them. Their legs were very tired from all that swimming. "Hop aboard!" called Nick, and they did, croaking their thanks. And the water got still higher, and carried the boat up the canyon wall, where they were joined by the snakes who had slithered up into the highest trees that grew on the cliffs, and the iguanas who had clambered up the rocky slopes, and little lizards, the geckos who had used their sticky feet to climb almost out of the canyon. One by one, Nick brought them all carefully aboard. And last of all were the tortoises, who lived right at the top of the canyon walls. In they all came, just in time. And then, disaster struck. The smallest tortoise, who wasn't very fast at all, couldn't quite get from the rock on which he was perched into the boat. His feet slipped and plop! He disappeared down into the stormy lake that had been the brook that ran through the canyon. "Oh no!" cried Nick in horror. Not stopping to think, he jumped into the water. Down, down, down he swam, until he caught the tiny tortoise who had sunk like a stone. Up, up, up he swam, and came up just by the boat. He reached up and put the little tortoise in with his family. But the sides of the wooden boat were now very slippery. Nick couldn't clamber in, until his animal friends lent a hand. Not so much a hand in the case of the snakes, who linked themselves together like a rope for Nick to hold on to. The frogs plopped back into the water and pushed him up, and the geckos, with their sticky feet, clung to the side of the boat, and they all worked together to heave him back in. "Thank you," said Nick, breathlessly. The boat sailed on, and at long last the rain started to ease, and a sunbeam broke through the dark clouds, and a beautiful gliding lizard landed on the prow, which is what you must remember to call the front of your boat when you are sailing it. The lizard had flown down from the top of a tall star pine, one of the star pines that was directly next to Nick's front door, which is right where the Noasaurus's ark had come ashore. Wearily, Nick climbed out of the boat. He was very grateful to have rescued all of the animals. He hoped they might be able to find new homes on the hill, in the wood around his house. But the storm hadn't quite finished yet. There was an ear-splitting crack of thunder, followed by a flash of lightning, which struck one of the tall palm trees just behind Nick's house. There was a horrible splintering sound as the trunk cracked, and the tree started to fall. "Oh no!" cried Nick in distress. "My poor house! It'll be squashed flat!" But then, the most remarkable thing happened. The tortoises, and the geckos, and the iguanas, and the snakes, and the frogs, and the beetles, and the snails, and the millipedes, and the earwigs, and the grasshoppers, and the ants all hopped, slithered, scuttled, crawled, and flew as fast as they could towards the falling palm tree. And as I arrived, what did I see? All of those animals pushing the tree, pushing with all their might and main to push that palm back up again. You see, you'll find it's very often true that if you help others, they'll help you. Nick thanked all his animal friends, and that's really how my story ends. And as the thunder gave a final rumble, Nick and I went indoors for blackberry crumble. The animals found new homes on the hill, and many of them live there still. And just the other day I learned the butterflies have all returned. Here's a little bit more about my story. This story has an ark full of animals in it. A lot of the insects, reptiles, and amphibians you see today had relatives that lived at the same time as the dinosaurs, and some have barely changed at all. Caratonia was a butterfly from the Jurassic period, about 150 million years ago. Afromurma was an ant that lived in the Cretaceous period, about 80 million years ago. Eoproscopia was a type of grasshopper that also lived during the Cretaceous period. Zygracilabis was a type of earwig from the Cretaceous period. Zygracilabis got trapped in sticky gum called resin that leaked from the trunks of certain trees. The resin became fossilized as an orange-coloured gemstone called amber, preserving the earwig inside. Siphonaeulis was a type of millipede that still lives today in Indonesia and Mexico. Some of their ancestors were trapped in amber too during the Cretaceous period and became fossils. Condonella was a type of Cretaceous snail. Oma is a beetle that is a type of living fossil. You can still find them today in Australia, but their very close relatives first appeared in the Triassic period, 200 million years ago. Later relatives of theirs were trapped in the same amber as the earwigs were. Calobatrachus was a very early type of frog whose fossils were found in China. He was only 94 millimeters long. Najash was a type of snake from the Cretaceous period of South America. He probably lived underground in a burrow and had 2 little legs still attached to the end of his tail. Desert iguana was a type of iguana that lived in the Cretaceous period in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. Her scientific name isn't very imaginative. Cretaceous gecko, whose name is about as imaginative as desert iguana, is a type of gecko lizard from the Cretaceous period. She was also caught in the same amber as the beetles and earwigs. Most geckos can't blink and have to clean their eyes with their long tongues. They also have special foot pads which let them climb vertical walls. Australochelys was a tortoise that lived in Africa in the Jurassic period. Xianglong, whose name means flying dragon in Chinese, was a Cretaceous lizard. He had 8 ribs that stuck out on each side and were covered with skin, which let him glide between trees. When a volcano erupts, the molten rock or lava that bubbles up through it is dangerous, as it can be as hot as 1,200 degrees Celsius. That's exceptionally hot. During an eruption, there may be a lot of rain, lightning, and thunder. All the ash that the volcano throws into the air collects water droplets from the atmosphere. Scientists don't quite know where the lightning comes from, but they think maybe the ash affects electricity in the atmosphere too. Big volcanic eruptions can have even more long-lasting effects. In 1815, a volcano called Tambora erupted in Indonesia, and the cloud it produced lowered temperatures around the globe so much that in Europe and America, 1816 was known as the year without a summer. The Earth is very fragile. Volcanoes and floods can change the face of the planet and wipe out whole species of animals. But an even greater threat to animals and the Earth is when humans mistreat the planet. When humans cause floods or fires, or when they pollute places or take away the places animals live, those animals can often disappear, like the butterflies, or even go extinct. So, be like Nick, and be kind to the nature around you. Well, thank you for joining me for a story from Dinosaur Dell. I hope that you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed writing it and telling it. Now, one day I'd obviously like to turn all of my Dinosaur Dell stories into storybooks that anyone can read at home, perhaps using some of the character drawings and photos of Tasmania that you saw on the screen while I was reading the story. I'd love to hear from you, so if you enjoyed the story, or you'd just like to say hello, or even better, tell me who your favourite dinosaur is, please let me know in the comments below, or do visit my website www.alexscottfairley.com, and hopefully I'll see you next time for another story from Dinosaur Dell. Bye for now.